Let's see, before I start, I just want to say that the entire festival, but this panel in particular, is for Studs Terkel. And he would have loved these people. Anyway, I want to get out of the way fairly quickly, except to say that I had some cockamamie idea in bringing these four people together, and we'll see whether it works. I feel a little bit like I'm herding cats here, but they're very cool cats, as you will see. And I thought we would start with Martha and John, and I had a few questions to ask both of them after their presentations, and then we'll continue down the line with Kelly and Blaise. But Martha, let's start with you. You are at the end of a huge encyclopedic project, which must feel amazing. Tell us a little bit about it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you all, and Ren and Carla especially, for inviting me to this wonderful panel. I expect I'm going to learn a great deal from my colleagues, and I feel a little bit like the before and after shot here. So I've been asked to talk to you today about the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary Project, a massive lexicographical project that began in 1921 at the University of Chicago, that published its first volume only in 1956, and whose final volume went to press in 2007. So first, what is a dictionary? A dictionary generally is understood to be a compilation and definition of a given word store. It is impelled always by an intellectual curiosity about the world around us, by the desire to organize the words that define the world, and to codify that information and place it in a systematic and retrievable, accessible form. There are, of course, many different kinds of dictionary. There are monolingual and multilingual or polyglot dictionaries. There are general, slang, technical, unabridged, and abridged dictionaries, academic and commercial dictionaries, dictionaries for native speakers and foreign speakers, reverse dictionaries, crossword solvers dictionaries, dictionaries produced by a single individual, and dictionaries like my own, the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary, produced by a team or generations of teams. A modern dictionary, by which I mean dictionaries of the last 300 years or so, might try to include for each lemma or each head word some or all of the following: etymology, where it comes from linguistically, how it evolved into the form as we have seen it; orthography, how the word is written; pronunciation, how native speakers say the word; the number of syllables; the morphology, syntax, synonyms, antonyms; and most important of all, of course, the definition of the various senses of the word, possibly illustrated by quotations. This last, the giving of definitions by illustrations, is the most significant, for this supplies information not only about the word, but also about the world in which the word operates. This is the crux for those of us dealing with the words of alien cultures, whether ancient and no longer active, or modern but other. Because if I don't know the context of the word, I can never really understand it. I might know that a word refers to an eating surface, for example, but I won't know whether it's a table or a snack tray or a luncheonette counter or paper plate. I might know that a particular word refers to a step in the process of textile making, but I won't know whether it's spinning or weaving or quilt making or pattern laying, dyeing, or embroidery. The possibilities can, of course, be almost endless, and sometimes all we can do is sketch the bare outlines. Each dictionary, ancient or modern, draws upon its predecessors. The early editors and planners of the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary did not, of course, invent their methodology out of whole cloth. They relied, first of all, on the accumulated wisdom of centuries of European lexicographical traditions. For example, it was not a given that our dictionary would be organized according to the Latin alphabet, the ABC sequence, rather than, say, according to Semitic roots. One model that was common in the late Middle Ages, alphabetized only by first letter. My own library shelves, I confess, are organized that way. All authors whose names start with A or B or C are together, and I really don't pay much attention to whether or not Biggs comes before Brinkman, say. I put the books in enough of an order so that I can retrieve them in a sort of Chicago style economics theory with the minimal effort to get them back. But the alphabet, too, is not the only way to organize a dictionary, any more than it's the only way to organize your books. With books, some people organize by subject, fiction over here, poetry there, biographies on the next shelf, or by height, tall books on some shelves, or how tall you are and how high you can reach, by frequency of use. Often consulted volumes will usually be closer to hand. One of the founding members of the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary, the late I.J. Gelb, organized his books by color, and then it turned out he was colorblind. Other than alphabetic organization, the most common way of organizing a dictionary is by thematic or topical units. We're all familiar with the Thesaurus, which literally means a word treasury, that constructs trees with branches and twigs, which covers a thematic unit, verbs of motion or furniture or colors, natural or celestial phenomena, and so on. Indeed, in ancient Mesopotamia, 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, scholars organized their word lists in this very natural way. And I put natural in quotes, and we'll see where we come by the end of the day on that. Because one word in all of its various senses and uses can fit into more than one thematic unit, individual words are repeated in a thesaurus, resulting in a useful but complex system of cross-listing and cross-referencing. Now, we today use dictionary and thesaurus sometimes usually very differently, almost as inversions. A dictionary is a word list by ABC sequence, a thesaurus a word list by thematic groups. But the ultimate decisive feature of a dictionary must be the giving of a definition. By using other words and/or illustrative examples, the meaning of the key word is revealed in the dictionary. Now, dictionaries do not emerge from some lexicographical Sinai. They are the products of human beings and human efforts, and as human beings, dictionary makers do not always restrain their own beliefs and prejudices. Every entry is included or excluded by the dictionary maker as a result of very implicit, sometimes explicit, dictionary making process. And so, therefore, dictionaries end up having personalities. Let me give you some obvious examples from the Chambers 20th Century Dictionary, published first in 1972, and which used to be the Scrabble Dictionary, which unashamedly betrays the author's peculiar worldview and sense of humor. Jaywalker, a careless pedestrian whom motorists are expected to avoid running down. Middle-aged, between youth and old age, variously reckoned to suit the reckoner. Noose, a snare or bond generally, especially by hanging or marriage. Now, this is comical to us because we have lived in the 20th century that the Chambers organized, but it will be puzzling to future generations. So, for example, a close look at Samuel Johnson's 1755 Dictionary of the English Language reveals a very Anglican Tory world. Noah Webster's 1828 American Dictionary of the English Language, on the other hand, reflects the language needs of a whole new nation, an ocean away from the, quote, center of the English language. So, having looked briefly at the Western European context of modern dictionaries, we come to the early 20th century and the formative years of our Chicago Assyrian Dictionary project. But I want to jump back for just another minute from the 20th century AD to the 20th century BC. For the story of the compilation of the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary cannot be told without understanding Mesopotamian scribes' own compilations, and those native compilations are arguably the most significant contributions to our modern enterprise. By 2500 BC, Mesopotamian scribes were compiling word lists. The concept of order is fundamental to this endeavor, and the Sumerian and later Akkadian scribes in the scribal centers of the huge cities along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, roughly modern Iraq and Syria, ordered the words describing their worlds. In essence, they compiled a register of the known world. In the earliest stages, these word lists, like the modern thesaurus, were simple lists of Sumerian words organized by themes. A few centuries later, the Akkadian Semitic peoples who came to dominate the area and who used the same writing system but who had a different culture and language attempted translations from Sumerian, thus giving us the earliest bilingual word lists. Later still, as cultural and scribal influences spread throughout the ancient Near East, this practice of listing words by one group of people and providing equivalences yielded polyglot lists, Sumerian, Akkadian, Hittite, and even sometimes adding a fourth language such as Hurrian or Ugaritic. Among the many different types of these lexical lists, as we call them, the most thesaurus-like is an enormous compilation titled by its ancient writers Ura-Chabulu, after the first words of the text. This work has 24 chapters with over 10,000 entries covering every conceivable thematic or topical area of both the natural and man-made world. Legal and administrative terms, fish, pottery, wild animals, domestic animals, human characteristics, psychological terms, etc., etc. Eventually, the corpus expanded and included lists that provided synonyms, antonyms, homonyms, and simple compound writings. The craft of dictionary making is now considered a science much more than an art, thanks in large part to the late Ladislav Zagusta's 1971 Manual of Lexicography, the Bible of lexicographers, and his earlier work, which greatly influenced the standard operating procedures formulated by the first editors of the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary. But the most important source for any dictionary is always going to come from consulting outside dictionaries. And one has to be careful to draw a distinction between plagiarism and precedent. I'm reminded of something someone said: to steal from one author is plagiarism, to steal from many authors is research. I can't remember who said it. This is only a little facetious because the history of lexicography really is a history of stealing from previous authors and their works. As many of you know from the story of the first great American dictionary wars, the 60-year battle between Noah Webster, represented by his death by the interests of his publishers, the Merriam Brothers, and Webster's apprentice, Joseph Worcester, who was accused of plagiarizing from Webster's dictionary. For the Assyrian Dictionary Project, we drew heavily on earlier dictionaries available from 1896, 1905, 1926, and especially from a German language dictionary that was compiled between 1959 and 1986 by Wolfram von Soden, itself based on the earlier accumulation of files belonging to Meissner, who died during World War II. Interestingly, his widow, Meissner's widow, offered his surviving files to us in Chicago in 1947, requesting in exchange food parcels for the rest of her life. Over the years, over the 30 years of publishing, these two projects reacted constantly and responded to one another, either in a kind of mutual competition and cooperation. In this case, the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary had the first word with its first 1956 volume, and we will have the last word too. But we also know that others will come along and overlay our dictionary with their own contributions, adding or deleting stylistic or lexical features, correcting our mistakes, and creating yet another new palimpsest.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a few questions. I'm going to save them because I'm going to let John speak first and talk about what it's like to be on this side of, on the other side of launching instead of completing a dictionary, to be launching a project. And tell us what you're up to.
Okay, thank you. I'm delighted to talk about the in-process work of the creation of the Encyclopedia of Life, and we've put this document at the back of the room as well as this in the back of the room, and I'll come back to what each of those is. I want to introduce Audrey Aronofsky, who is the director of the Biosynthesis Center at the Field Museum, which is the Field Museum effort in the Encyclopedia of Life, and Ken Angelsic. Ken is the paleontologist whom I will refer at the end of these comments. So Audrey and Ken, if you could both stand, I would appreciate it and wait. I would like you first just to close your eyes, if you would. And I would like you to become a 13-year-old girl in Nairobi with a memory of the explosion at the U.S. Embassy that took place when you were just an infant. But because your uncle was killed in that blast, you have a memory of it. You live in a concentrated, congested urban area in a slum just outside the center of Nairobi. This last year, ethnic violence spilled over in the elections that took place. And you have no chance to go to college, and certainly on the basis of the almost 0 degrees, PhD degrees awarded in Africa, you have no opportunity for a doctorate. So you can open your eyes now, and then I want you to close your eyes again. Now I want you to become a 12-year-old boy. You can pick either Lawndale or Englewood. You live in a single-parent home. You live in a neighborhood in which there is gang violence. Drugs are endemic. Your home is without books. When you enter as a freshman into a Chicago high school, you will have a 2% chance of receiving a bachelor's degree prior to the age of 25. And you live 5 miles from one of the greatest concentrations of wealth in the world, namely where we are right now. So I'm going to go through the Encyclopedia of Life with some rapidity. You can open your eyes now. But I want you to think about those 2 kids and the impact that this kind of learning could have on them in flattening the world and opening opportunities. Now, this says, oh, it's up there. It's not here. It's up there. Great. Okay, good. So what we're trying to do is to build, as Ren said, a website for every species on Earth, okay? What is it? It is a clearinghouse for information, biology, genetics, behavior, physiology, geography. It's a multi-institutional effort. We are partnering with the Smithsonian Institution, with Harvard, with the Marine Biological Laboratory at Woods Hole, with the Missouri Botanic Garden, and with the Australian Atlas of Living Australia. We are putting together a global network of scientific experts and regard this as a tool for research, for education, and for conservation. We also are bringing in industrial commercial partners in this, and I want to show you a video that was produced by Avenue A Razorfish to lay out the nature of the Encyclopedia of Life. So that's the way we start. Let me now give you a couple of examples of what this looks like in reality today. Here's one of my favorites because Mary Hennon, a scientist at the Field Museum, is the curator of these pages on the peregrine falcon. So there's Mary. Here's the peregrine falcon in English or in Latin. Here is its red list status. Here is the bar that enables you, if you want less detail or more, to select a level at which that is of interest to you. Here is where it is classified and fits into the broader kingdom of life. Moving on to the next page, the physical description of the animal. Moving on to the next page, the molecular biology of the animal. And moving on to the next page, the geographic distribution of the animal. This then is synced in to everything that is known about the peregrine falcon in the literature, on the web, current information, peregrine falcon, encyclopediaoflife.org. Go to it tonight and look at the peregrine, which is being reintroduced into Chicago at the top and sides of the canyons, which are our office buildings. Well, who's building it? That's the team in Chicago on the left. There's Audrey right there. A group of botanists who were in to sort out the botany kingdom. A group of individuals focusing on shrimp and lobsters over in Taiwan, and a whole series of international advisory boards. How do we make it? Each page has a virtual curator. This is Rick Ree, botanist at the Field Museum, who studies the plants of the Himalayas and eastern China. We are scanning in with data partners, Amphibian Web, FishBase, the Tree of Life, the Animal Diversity Web, integrating those databases into the Encyclopedia of Life. The technology that enables us to do this, that did not exist a decade or 15 years ago, with the mashup technology, with the architecture based on species names, with a workbench, a virtual workbench, enabling people to insert information. And what we do is try to build on other data sources, not replace those. The Field Museum, with Audrey and her colleagues, has what we call the Biodiversity Synthesis Center, and this is kind of the intellectual hub of the effort. Creating new content, developing new tools and visualization, using data on major research questions, and implementing innovative educational projects. The Biodiversity Heritage Library, every natural history museum of size, we are now scanning the literature going back into the 16th and 17th centuries. So all the data that are available from scanning, open access, and levels the playing field so that people around the world have access to this information. For science, understanding of evolution and biodiversity, biomedical research, agriculture, naturalists. We can download custom field guides. People can put in sounds and pictures. And for conservation, critical to all of us. We are in the midst of the 6th great extinction caused by Homo sapiens sapiens, and we have endangered and threatened species around the world. We have issues with commerce on the invasion of vector species, and I think we're just beginning to see the impact of that on the world away from the equator, and port inspectors, intrusive new species that come in to our areas. To me, this is what is the most exciting part of it, with all due respect to the scientists. The educational impact of broadening knowledge to kids is just critical. We've started with some Massachusetts high schools and universities. We've got an online virtual initiative that I'll talk about in just a second. But the future of providing that kid in Lawndale or that girl in Nairobi access to this kind of information. So one of the spin-outs of this is a project that Ken has done. He, as a paleontologist, excavates in Tanzania. So he's going down through the various layers of soil, uncovering ancient fossils, and sitting with him while he's in Tanzania are kids in the basement of the Field Museum and kids in New York City participating in a virtual dig in Tanzania. An exciting, and that's the disc that is in the back for those who are interested. The next one is Why Reef. This we're doing with Yville.net, an online community of 10 to 15-year-olds, and here looking at a coral reef. And what we'll do with this coral reef is we will damage it in various ways with oil spills, with warming of the temperature and bleaching of the reef, with dynamiting, with sewage runoff, and give the kids the challenge as to how they can solve those problems. We have yet another one, which will be in Zambia, and this will be our third online experience. The vision for this, Ed Wilson, E.O. Wilson, the great conservationist and biologist from Harvard University, and a number of people in the scientific community. But the real impact is Jonathan Fanton, the president of the MacArthur Foundation, who had the vision to say, I want to put MacArthur resources against very major projects. And with Jonathan's urging, this group has been formed. Additional funding has come in from the Sloan Foundation, and you can see that locally we have support as well. I think this is an enormously exciting project, both for us at the Field Museum, for the partners, for the scientific community, for the kids who otherwise would not have access to this kind of knowledge, and for the world as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Before we go to Kelly, I thought I'd just ask a few questions. And John, sticking more to the encyclopedic rather than the learning side of things. But I think I'll start with Martha. I'm curious what hearing him brings up in you in terms of what the work you've been doing. And one way I'd ask it is we speak of languages evolving. You, in fact, were describing how these lists would evolve over time. And for that matter, you also talked about the way dictionaries evolve. When we say that, we say it all the time, is that a metaphor? Are you saying that languages act like life? Or what does that mean to say languages evolve?
Certainly, of course, yes, of course, languages do evolve in the sense that they are organic, they are born, grow up, change, rebel.
What would that be?
Reproduce.
What would a rebellion language be?
Slang, going off into making argot that might define, say, criminal classes or youth groups. These are all ways that language can be used.
When you say that, by the way, I'm reminded that your colleague Matthew Stolper was showing me around the Oriental Institute, and he came upon one particular plinth, and he said, this is really weird because it is a palace, I forget what it was that he said, but this is kind of Babylonian Ebonic. He was saying, this is like slang. Why they would put this on this wall? And it was
for political purposes, propaganda purposes, individuality issues. No, so of course languages do evolve. Static, nothing is going to be static. And as I as I tried to show, that dictionaries might capture a particular moment in time, but every dictionary will capture a moment in an evolving language. I was very struck by the way John's project and my project have such similar goals, but because the technology that's available and has been available, we've been able to ask very different questions or similar questions, but on very different scales. We're both looking to be comprehensive. We're talking about distribution. When you were talking about the different slides for the Falcon, you were showing distribution, morphology, usage, genetics. These are all what we try to do for any entry in the dictionary article, of course. What is particularly interesting to me, and I would like to ask John, is what the implicit or explicit bias might be in doing this project. Is one of the things I tried to point out is that every dictionary maker has speaks from her or his own life experience in politics and so forth. And there is definitely one in the Encyclopedia of Life. You classify things according to English and Latin terminology, for example. You think about flying creatures and crawling creatures and microbes and so forth according to certain scientific standards that have been accepted. And so there is a bias and an assumption behind all of this too. It would be interesting to talk about the assumptions behind that.
Sure. Well, on the language front, I hope that we do not limit ourselves to Latin and English. We are working in Spanish and French now, German and Urdu. So we hope eventually to have a much more comprehensive. The other dimension of bias is that this is largely an Anglo,
That's right.
U.S.-centric. When you look at those, Australia is the only current partner we have. Well, next week we'll have a meeting of our council down in Mexico City trying to bring in the Spanish-speaking people of Central and South America. So that's our first bias, is that we got started, right here in the good old U.S. of A. And the Europeans are having a tough time getting themselves organized as how they're going to participate in this. London and Paris and then the museums in Germany are all on the cusp of getting more deeply involved. So that's a geographic and a language bias to get started. The next is the sheer complexity of what's involved. We're now at about 70,000 of these that we have up in somewhat semi-comprehensive way, with another couple 100,000 of species drawn in from the various databases. But the bias, since there is a fish database, most of our stuff is fish, because they got started first. Right. Amphibians next.
Right.
The botanists need to catch up now.
What about mammals? Mammals are way behind the fish. Mammals, I said.
Oh, mammals. No, there's some good stuff on mammals, too. Okay. But the other thing the mega diverse groups, we, in talking with our friends at the Cornell Ornithological Laboratory, I say, what's the most popular bird? Anybody know the most popular bird? The cardinal. I said, what's the second most popular? The cardinal. What's the third most? Well, we got to about 10 before one of the woodpeckers got into this thing. And so there is a bias toward those things that we know and know well. Right. When we think about mega diverse groups, you think about the number of beetles that there are. And we've kind of done a pretty good job. We got the millipedes to do, we got the centipedes to do, we've got, the vast world of microbes. And you think about the ocean. There is so much that's out there. So we have the bias of kind of historically what we know, and now we've got to start to think about the next. By the time we get to 1.8 million, clearly we already know it's at least 2 million, and there are many, many more than that. So that by the time after 10 years, we're kind of around the 2 million target, there's going to be another however many there are. So there's the bias of kind of what you know best.
That's what I had with my my preceding dictionaries that I started with, right? You start with what you know and what others have done before you. So you started with your ornithology collection, right?
One last question for John, and then eventually I'll go to Kelly and bring you to but the part of your thing that was the most exciting to me at one level was that great thing with the branching, and you would go there and you go back up and you go back and so forth. And that's, of course, evolutionary way of thinking about how everything is, and obviously is the gold standard scientifically. But it occurs to me it's exactly what happens with a word. That a word has its etymology. You go this way, you go that way, and it looks the same way. And it's, in a way, the way I would ask this question is we were talking about this before, that when you talk about DNA, one talks about DNA as a code. One talks about the information in the genetic code and so forth. Is that, again, speaking metaphorically? I mean, is life a language? in some sense?
Yeah, well, clearly it is a language, and the thing that is exciting about the molecular work that you do is how it balances with or disputes work that you've done in the more taxonomic sense or in the more fossil work. So we know from the fossil record that a particular specimen existed X million years ago. And for a long time, that was kind of the assumption, well, that was, when it originated, but not so, because that's the first one that's been discovered.
Right.
Well, it must have existed before. So as you get into the molecular, into the DNA, it turns out that it's a lot older than that individual.
See, but I think
specimen
that
you
what you're
came
doing
up
is
with.
so similar to what she's doing.
Absolutely.
I think, classification, the world of taxonomy and systematics is a description, and it goes back into the 18th century with the great dictionaries of Linnaeus and others who first sorted out this trinomial way of classifying species, classification, description. And then in comes this whole world of DNA, which all of a sudden, those things that we assumed were very closely related are distantly related.
Right.
And things that we thought were distantly related are much more closely.
Well, I want to bring Kelly in at this point, and one thing just to observe is that this is intelligence, this is the brain going across the waters of being. I mean, this is the human brain in this case trying to organize all this, but you in fact are trying to do an atlas of the brain itself. So maybe you could come in and talk to us.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to talk to you today, and now we are going to switch gears a little bit. In fact, it's interesting. I'm going to be speaking about a project, an encyclopedic project that is completed, as well as one that we are just beginning. So I'm kind of a hybrid of the first two speakers here. One thing that just struck me about the prior conversation was the discussion of bias in the data and information, and starting with what is known. Something interesting about our work is that we are generating data in an unbiased manner. I mean, it's biased only by the technologies that are available, and in fact, the content is intended in large part to discover what is unknown. So with that, I just want to move along here, excuse me. First, I want to tell you a little bit about where I come from. We're not from a traditional university. I work at the Allen Institute for Brain Science, and that is a nonprofit medical research institute focused on the brain. We are dedicated to taking on these sorts of large-scale encyclopedic projects. That's a real focus of what we do. And we then put these resources out there online for the world at large to digest, sort through, and do what they will with. We are multidisciplinary in approach, as was mentioned earlier. We've got biologists, physicists, engineers, mathematicians, and all sorts of people working together under one roof towards common goals and common projects, which really distinguishes us from a traditional individual investigator-driven organization. And more importantly, we are multidisciplinary in our reach. These projects we develop and put out there are really intended to help support research across all fields of brain science, whether somebody's studying Alzheimer's disease, somebody studying ion channel biophysics, or what have you. So the project we are currently just starting on, and I'll touch on it now and then circle back to it later, is a detailed map of the human brain. I think we're all at some level intrinsically interested in the brain, and in fact are at least grateful that we have one that functions when it does. But we also know that devastating things can happen when things go wrong, and we know precious little about how the brain actually works. So brain mapping is really an old field. In the 1800s, it was really at the level of understanding there are different regions of the brain that are responsible for controlling different functions. Modern medical imaging technologies here in fMRI have led us to be able to map more precisely where in the brain different kinds of functions are happening. We've got rational thought up here, we've got language over here, we've got vision being processed back here. But at the same time, that's still at a relatively crude level. And really, brain activity, where everything is happening and being driven, is down at a really fine level, at the level of cells, and even below cells, at the level of molecules and genes. So we're striving to create a brain map that digs down to that level. But we didn't start just there. So I want to tell you a bit about a project that is completed already, and that is the Allen Brain Atlas of the mouse brain that was discussed earlier. And that project came about when Paul Allen, our institute founder, who donated a good, nice, generous gift of seed funding to get us started, he convened a group of leading neuroscientists from a number of different institutions and posed the question, what can be done that will have a significant impact on brain science? What can be done that will really catapult the field forward? Now, at the time, the Human Genome Project was just being completed, along with a number of other genome projects. So we then, at that point, had a general parts list listing what all the genes are in the genome. At the same time, there were great advances in technology, high-throughput automated systems for generating lots and lots of genomic data, as well as advances in the computational world, both on the hardware and software side, to be able to manage that data. And so the decision was reached that let's combine these things, apply them to brain science, and that's how the Allen Brain Atlas came to be. The Allen Brain Atlas of the mouse brain is, and we've heard this word before, a comprehensive map of the adult mouse brain, and it's specifically of gene activity. It's comprehensive in 2 dimensions, both it's genome-wide, accounting for every single gene that's known, as well as anatomically comprehensive, mapping throughout the entire brain. It's similar in scope to the Human Genome Project, which identified what all the genes are. And it takes it to the next step to try to unravel what that parts list, how that parts list plays out in a biological system to actually create a biological organism and drive its physiology. So our map identifies where each of those genes is turned on within the brain. Again, it's a big project, about 20,000 genes, millions of images, a detailed anatomical map of over 700 structures, and a whole bunch of visualization and analysis tools to make the data more accessible. And again, this is publicly available online. The Allen Brain Atlas, it was completed in 2006. It's a 3-year project, and it is really seeing widespread use. We're really gratified that this tool we developed for the research community has been adopted as an essential resource and is really changing the way some people do work. We see about 10,000 unique visitors each month coming from labs all across the world, including those in university settings, as well as pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies, nonprofits, government research organizations. And additionally, even though this was built specifically as a tool for the scientific research community, we are finding that more and more it's being used as a student training tool. It's being used in education. So some of the information that's coming out of this project, one of the findings, and something that could only be seen from a comprehensive analysis that we found in our organization, is that 80% of all the genes in the genome are active in some way in the brain. That's an astonishing number and much higher than was previously estimated. We're also seeing a number of laboratories across the world exploring all sorts of diseases, so the Atlas is helping advance research in autism, Alzheimer's disease, epilepsy, obesity. You name it, if there's a disease in brain science, there's likely somebody who's using this resource to help address their questions. It's also leading to the development of new research tools, and most importantly, I think, it is saving researchers time and money. We hear over and over again from researchers that what used to take days, months, or even years to do, they can now do with the click of a mouse. Yes. Just briefly, to just sort of let you know how we did it, we're generating the data. We're not synthesizing data that exists. So we have a general pipeline of data generation relying highly on automated robotics in the laboratory, automated imaging that runs 24/7. At the peak of our project, we were generating 1 terabyte of data a day. I didn't know what a terabyte was until I started working here, but a terabyte is 1,000 gigabytes. And then there's a whole host of automated computational algorithms and image processing tools that the data goes through in order to package it and make it ready to present out on the web. Just some facts about scale. The total project generated about 600 terabytes of data, or 20,000 iPods worth, although iPods are getting bigger, so that number's probably getting smaller. 250,000 microscope slides, 85 million microscope images, and 200 liters of ultra-pure water were used each day. And translating to the Seattle language, that's the equivalent of 425 grande lattes. That's how we like to think about things. So generating the data is the first step. Then, as we've discussed with the other projects, one needs to organize it. One of the things that we have done is map all of these two-dimensional images we took into a common three-dimensional framework, allowing 3D reconstruction both of the brain anatomy as well as the gene activity patterns. And that enables us to generate and provide a number of different search tools. So different end users who have different questions and needs to filter the data in different ways can approach it from different angles. There are also a number of different kinds of summaries to see sort of different levels of gene activity across the brain and other things sort of at a glance, as well as a whole host of visualization tools and ways for programmatic computational access for those who want to suck the data into their own systems and start to play with it. So to take this out of abstraction, I'm just going to give you a quickie mock demo of the atlas, just so you can see what it looks like and get a sense of the look and feel. So you go into the mouse brain atlas here, and if you are interested in a gene, you see a whole bunch of images, all the images that show gene activity patterns, which are probably hard for you to see, but there's another way you can change the view of them and see these white highlighted areas show you the pattern of activity of that particular gene. You can then zoom in on one image in particular that you may be interested in. These darker areas are where the gene is active. You can zoom in virtual microscope view and see individual cells. And it gets a little bigger, as well as converting to a view that shows in a color format levels of high gene activity and relatively low gene activity. We also have three-dimensional viewing tools and that connect right to the raw data. So essentially what this three-dimensional tool does, it allows you to build a brain by adding the 3D volume reconstruction of one or more brain structures. It allows you to overlay the gene activity patterns of genes. You can rotate it, you can virtually slice it, and you can drive it directly to the raw original data that was generated. So again, this 3D tool has a lot of value as a viewing and filtering mechanism for organizing and seeing the data. So that was the Mouse Brain Atlas, which was our inaugural project of the Institute. We've since generated some other projects. Since 2006, we've been busy at work doing some more thematically focused studies. Earlier this year, we released the first installment of a genome-wide expression atlas of this mouse spinal cord, and in a couple of weeks, we'll be launching the first installment of data for a developing mouse brain atlas as well. But the big project we are really just starting on this year is that map of the human brain. And our vision for this is essentially to create something akin to Google Earth or Google Maps for the brain. Apologies to Blaise for virtual Earth is another option. But to basically move from global but moving from global topology and topographic organization down into the fine details of the brain, allowing users to seamlessly navigate between the two to get down to the nitty-gritty of what's actually happening in the brain. This is significantly more complex than working with the mouse brain. These images are drawn to scale. Here's a mouse brain, here's a human brain. So just looking at that, you can see this is a bigger task to tackle. On average, you can look at the mouse brain has 75 million nerve cells, for example. The human brain has 100 billion nerve cells. And no matter what metric you look at, essentially the human brain is 2,000 to 3,000 times more complex than the mouse brain. So we spent the bulk of the last year talking to the community and advisors and working amongst ourselves to try to figure out how are we going to tackle this project. And essentially, we're going to use the same data generating pipeline and really leverage that infrastructure we've established, retooling all along the way to accommodate work with the human brain. But also, we've added another data generation step, which allows us to more rapidly get to large quantities of genomic information, basically dissecting the human brain into about 1,000 parts and running each of those parts on what's called a microarray or a gene chip, which essentially gives us a menu or a readout of the inventory of all the genes that are active in that part. And we'll combine that with some of the other image data that we did as we did for the mouse brain. In the end, what we expect to come home with is, again, at the centerpiece, a 3D interactive explorer similar to the movie that I was unable to show you. That will be dynamically linked with a really vast repository of data and information on the human brain, all that gene activity information. And interestingly, we'll have data for more than one brain. It will be for about 10 different human brains representing both males and females. So I would say from mice to men, but actually we're going from mice to men and women. Also, another important component of this is we see, especially with the 3D visualization tools being so accessible to a larger audience, there's a tremendous amount of educational potential here. So we actually are actively seeking partners to develop educational resources, really leverage the resources we're building for educational and teaching purposes. And through talking to the research community, we anticipate that this human atlas will have an even broader impact than the already successful mouse brain atlas. And it will broaden from beyond just basic researchers to clinician scientists across all different brain-related specialties and into education. And I think what this tool will really do, it will link 3 areas of investigation into the brain that to date have been relatively separate. But really the combination of genomics, modern functional imaging, and the classical neuroanatomy is really essential to our understanding the brain, understanding how diseases unfold, and finding where the best points of intervention are to address disease. And that's all I have to say about that. I just wanted to iterate that this is an effort that is really a combined effort of a number of different people, and we really thank our founders, Paul Allen and Jody Patton, for establishing the Institute and giving us the opportunity to generate and provide these resources to the world, to our cohort of funders, as well as to the team of Institute staff, advisors, and others that have helped the projects along the way. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Kelly, before we bring Blaise in, a kind of question. Several times you had the classic image that we're familiar with of dendrites, and they branch out, which looks damn like the images we saw earlier of how the Encyclopedia of Life is being organized, which looks like how word trees look like and so forth.
Yep.
Is there, I mean, this is kind of a meta question, but do you think it has something to do with the way brains exist, that we classify things this way, or that we do decision trees, that we keep on having those circular things and so forth?
These trees and lists. Well, in fact, some of the naming conventions and ways that people have looked at brain structure have relied on what's considered their evolutionary origins. There are the whole field of naming and classifying brain structures is controversial. You look at the mouse brain, and then it gets worse with the human brain. You talk to 3 different scientists, you'll probably get 3 different answers about where the boundaries are and what the structures should be called and what's related to what, which is not unlike the evolutionary biology world. So yes, there is a sense of a hierarchical tree, and that has evolved and expanded over time.
I mean, don't you also think it's weird that a brain that has that look would keep branches and dendrites? I mean, that's in fact...
Yeah, the individual cells...
That it keeps on making diagrams like that.
Yeah,
Is that because the universe shaped the brain into that, because the universe is like that, it shaped the brain into that kind of way of being, or is it the other way around, that we see the universe that way because our brain's like that? No, that's not okay.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, but I mean, the point of individual cells within the brain being kind of a central core and all these branches emanating from it, it's really driven by the pressures of what the brain needs to do. These individual cells that branch out, they then touch and communicate with other cells, and all those branches are fundamental to the circuitry. Yeah. And that whole branching pattern does, in fact, get more complex up the evolutionary tree. Yeah. But exactly why and how, it's anybody's guess.
Well, Blaise is clearly itching to get into this, so I think we should get Blaise, and then we'll all talk together. But thank you so much, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you. We need to do a little technology swap here.
Okay. All right. I'm going to try and go a bit quickly because I have a feeling that we're probably behind. We must be behind.
No, not that. We've got a half an hour to the end of this session,
Great.
so that gives you some idea.
Great. All right. So the main thing that I'm going to show you today is Photosynth. That's certainly why Ren brought me, I think. Before I talk about Photosynth, I'll acknowledge and give a little bit of context. A lot of the computer vision aspects of Photosynth, and I'll explain what computer vision is in a moment, come from a collaboration between Microsoft Research and the University of Washington, and it was really a graduate student's work, Noah Snavely, who created this thing called phototourism that was very much the inspiration for this Photosynth project. It was a very nice academic industry collaboration. And Photosynth is really the successor to two different ideas. One of them was phototourism, and the other one was Sea Dragon, which is a company that I founded a few years ago and that Microsoft was kind enough to buy in 2006. When I was first bought, I was bought by Gary Flake, who was just starting up an organization called Live Labs inside Microsoft. And Live Labs is an applied research organization. It's grown to a little bit over 100 now. Applied research is research with the point other than publishing. The idea is that there are actually a lot of very interesting and cutting-edge things happening right now in computer science that, if people could have access to, would result in interesting things happening. And so we really de-emphasize the academic end of the research, even though that's my origins, and think more about application. Recently, I've changed charter a little bit and moved out of Live Labs and have become the architect of MSN, which some of you probably associate with the butterfly and this People magazine on the web type thing. It turns out that there are about 2,000 people in that part of the company, and they also do things like Virtual Earth, which is just like Google Earth, except less people use it, and also Photosynth now. Photosynth is the first project that Live Labs did that has graduated out of the labs and gone into a product organization. So I'll show you a bit of that in a moment. Now, a lot of what Photosynth is about, a lot of what I think all of these encyclopedic projects are about, is the process of constructing a mirror world of some kind. And whether the medium is paper or computer screens, data, as it is more and more often these days, it's about taking something that's out there and re-representing it on the other side of a mirror of some kind, re-representing it using a new language or a new set of symbols that we can define. The particular sort of representation that I'm most interested in isn't a semantic one like a dictionary, but rather a very visual one. It's about visual things. And the part of visual representations in computers that we're all very familiar with is graphics. This is a sketch by Uccello from, I guess, the 1420s or 1430s. And this really is the beginning of graphics. Graphics is, as defined by computer scientists, is the process of taking three-dimensional models and making drawings of them in 2 dimensions, taking 3 dimensions, reducing to 2 dimensions. So when you do this, you start off with coordinates in space, 3-dimensional coordinates of things in space, and then you define a camera, and you project those 3-dimensional coordinates onto the plane. So that's graphics. That's Uccello doing it. It's exactly the same thing if you've seen your kids playing video games. It's the same process. This is the inverse problem to graphics, which is called vision. And I don't mean vision in a very abstract way. I'm talking really here about computer vision, which is formally defined as the inverse problem to computer graphics, in exactly the same way that speech recognition for a computer, for example, is the inverse problem of speech synthesis. And if you've ever played with those little orange speak and spell toys from the 80s, you know that things like speech synthesis has been around for a long time. It's easy to turn a text into a sound wave because text is unambiguous. And so when you go from something unambiguous to an ambiguous representation, that's an easy problem. Whereas when you try to have a computer understand what I'm saying and create the transcript of it, that's what's called an inverse problem. It's just doing the reverse mapping, and it's always much harder. And in the same sense, computer vision is a much harder problem than computer graphics because it's the process of taking images of the three-dimensional world and reconstructing the three dimensions from the images. But it turns out this also has a Quattrocento antecedent. This is a reconstruction of a machine that Brunelleschi used to make very accurate drawings of the baptistry doors in Florence. And here what he's doing is he's using a mirror and a pinhole to compare a drawing that he's made using perspective techniques with what he's actually seeing in the world, and he's able to sort of overlay the two using stereo vision. And by doing that, you're able to see the error in the rendering, in the drawing. All right, we're going to skip ahead now to 1999. This is the man who I think really, computer vision is a field that's been around for decades, and it's had many very important contributors. But I think David Lowe is one of the very important ones, and he really is responsible for a breakthrough, I think, in how computer vision, how robust computer vision was, how many fields it could be applied to. What you're looking at here, so this is from a graphics paper from 1999. This is a toy train and a toy frog, and what he did was he devised a method for extracting features from imagery like this and then detecting those features in other images. So this is a photo in which there are actually two copies of the toy train, one here, and there's the frog hidden behind something else. But they're all in different attitudes, in different positions from the way they're represented in these images. And here's the computer finding the two toy trains and the toy frog based on the correspondence of features gathered from here and then applied to here. This is something that humans do very easily with our brains, but then again we've got the 20 gazillion neurons and so on, and we've evolved evolutionarily to do that. And it turns out to be very hard to get a computer to do this task. And David Lowe, by using a combination of black magic that nobody really yet understands, was able to define an algorithm that could do this. And since many other researchers have improved further on his techniques. These are the features in this image of the space shuttle. Actually, this image is a complete non sequitur, so we'll skip it. This is the thing that I think captured the imagination of Ren and of some other people when I've presented it before, and it really comes straight from Noah's graduate work. What he did was to go to Flickr, which is a photo service on the web. A lot of people store their vacation photos on there and so on. And he searched for Notre Dame, images of Notre Dame Cathedral, and downloaded many hundreds of them, thousands of them perhaps. And used David Lowe's techniques to identify features in those images. And out of those features, he was able to create a three-dimensional reconstruction using these known computer vision techniques of Notre Dame Cathedral based entirely on photography from Flickr. So here are those photos that he downloaded, and I'm sorry I'm not showing this interactively, but I'll show you something even better in a moment. And here is a sort of 3D reconstruction of the cathedral. It's just a cloud of points, but it's a three-dimensional cloud of points. And that's reconstructed from those images. All of these little orange diamonds on the ground, it's a pity we have so much light here on the stage. But all of these orange diamonds on the ground are reconstructed positions of all of those cameras. Now we see some other defect here. Okay, I see now why they had the lights up. So these orange cones are where everybody was standing when they took these photos of Notre Dame. And these algorithms were able to both reconstruct the 3D structure and the 3D positions of those cameras, which is quite a feat, quite an accomplishment. Okay, now we'll fast forward a little bit to a web service that we launched from Live Labs in August, just before I fell into the clutches of MSN. This is live on the web, and it's something you can play with at home tonight if you have a Windows computer. Here's our kind of crowdsourced version of phototourism, but the difference with Photosynth is that instead of going out and crawling the web for images, which has all sorts of legal and copyright issues behind it, and also has other issues that I'll get to in just a moment. Instead, anybody, can sign up and submit photos, and as those photos are getting uploaded to this service, your computer is doing the work to do this three-dimensional reconstruction. And then what ends up at the website is this three-dimensional representation plus the photos navigable in this three-dimensional fashion that anybody can then go and see. And when I say anybody, I mean anybody. We don't have privacy yet. We're working on that. So here's a very trivial case. Okay, so Seattle, once again, we like our coffee. These are just 6 images that I took with a little snapshot camera, and these white rectangles are the three-dimensional reconstruction. They're the reconstructed positions of all of those shots. So I can do these simple moves, moving in, out, around, only what was supported by those 6 shots. Okay, but the point is that the computer automatically figures out the relationships among those photos. Now let's go to a more interesting case. Here are my synths that I've made. And I am doing all of this live from the web, so if something goes wrong, you know that it wasn't canned. This is our nanny, Jessie, who just had our last day with us too. Actually, my kid's nanny, but sometimes it feels like my nanny. Just had her last day on Friday. We'll miss her. But in any case, this was just about 60 photos that I took of her sitting on a dock, and you see we can rotate to all these different points of view from which I took her. And all of those relationships are inferred from those photos entirely. I also took a bunch of close-ups of all of her tattoos, at least the ones that are visible. And so this is it's not a very impressive sort of encyclopedic project in some sense, but what it is showing you is that all of these relationships in these images are discoverable just from the photos. And we can zoom in and see. Well, this is taking a while to resolve. We must be having imperfect network connectivity. But in any case, you get the idea. It's probably a good thing because there's actually a limit to how close up one should really see a tattoo. This is one of the cool things about cameras these days is that for $100 you can buy an 8-megapixel camera, which if you've never viewed it using our wonderful Sea Dragon technology, you don't know how many pixels this is. It's better than film, and the amount of detail that's actually available in this imagery is a sort of detail that you never see if you just put the image up on your screen at full size like this, and if you don't have this way of fluidly zooming in and out, which is what Sea Dragon is. In any case. So this was my placeholder for those were the original photos. That was the 3D reconstruction. And as you can see, again, it's only a partial 3D reconstruction. It's a point cloud in 3 dimensions. It's not a video game-like model. But that point cloud is 3-dimensional, and it uses techniques. It uses an approach that's actually very similar to what Brunelleschi did with his pinhole and mirror. The idea is that you identify those features in common among all of those photos, and then you start off with a pair of photos and position them arbitrarily pointing in the same direction, position the points in 3 dimensions that you posit those common features to be on a plane far away from the images. And then you begin to move around, the computer. The computer begins to move around the points and move around the cameras in order to decrease the error in the positions that those 3D points would get projected onto from those 2 points of view. When that error has gone to 0, you know that the points are in the right place in 3 dimensions and the camera is in the right place. And then you begin adding cameras. And once you've added all of the cameras and you've added all the points, you have this 3-dimensional model and you have the camera positions. Okay. Now, of course, not everybody has done just whimsical things with this thing now that it's up. Some of the stuff that's up is quite serious, like, let's see. The National Archives, this was kind of a cool one. And we have a synth coming in at a rate of at least 1 a minute nowadays. So this is now getting used in a pretty serious way. These photos were taken in fairly low light, but this is at the National Archives, where the Constitution is being kept. And in addition to taking lots of photos of this environment, we also added photos that are only available, there's very, very high resolution scans that are available from the National Archives of these documents. And the nice thing is that by throwing those really high resolution scans, these are about 50 megapixels, in with the photography, the software is able to understand where those documents fall inside this three-dimensional space. Right, so all of the pages are here being exhibited, and by clicking on them, I go to the actual document. I used to do a lot of work on rare books, and I would love to see much more uptake of this sort of technology with primary documents like that. That'd be wonderful. Now, before I show you too many other things, let me also type in the name of, oops, did I mistype? Linda Martini. Linda Martini is connected with the Encyclopedia of Life project, and we've been collaborating with them because whenever you have a species that's macroscopic, that can be seen, then it seems like an obvious sort of thing to enable people in the field to be able to take photos of something, reconstruct it in 3D, explore it remotely, and so we've been doing that. Linda has taken all sorts of wonderful synths, as we call them, of different creatures, and having this ability to really go into the gory details and explore a creature from multiple points of view, compare different specimens to each other, and so on, I think is going to be very interesting. And this is the sort of thing that I didn't know, for example, that apparently the way many of these animals are defined is based on type specimens that are housed in places like the Field Museum and the MCN at Harvard and so on. And so being able to really see in the field what those type specimens look like in detail from every angle turns out to be important in order to understand what you're looking at when you're out in the field. And this is available everywhere, like all of these online projects, of course. Okay, so on a kind of encyclopedic, and there are many other fun examples of things that I could show you, since there are tons of synths on this site by now. But on an encyclopedic note, I want to skip ahead to the business of really making the mirror world, because that's the part of this that I think excites me the most. The encyclopedia of everything, in some sense, or at least of everything visual. We so far are not in the business yet of connecting these synths to each other or connecting them to the world in a geographic sense. Although that's one of the things that I'm working on now, since I'm now the architect of both Photosynth and Virtual Earth. So trying to connect the cartography and the mapping to these very dense visual representations of things in the world is a big part of my job now. And the reason that's so exciting is that even in the couple of months since we've launched, we've had a tremendous number of sites all around the world get uploaded, get synthed. So this was actually only 3 days after we launched, I think. Already there were dozens of synths of Notre Dame. One of those synths alone was as good as what could be scraped from Flickr. And the reason for that is that even though Flickr has many, many more images than we do as yet, most of those images are of the same view of Notre Dame with a different face in front. And whereas if you're actually making it as a synth, then you'll take photos from various points of view, you'll go around the side and so on. So one photo taken as part of a concerted effort to synth something or to capture something from the real world is worth many casual shots. And over time, I expect that this sort of use of photography and of video to capture different parts of the world is going to become sort of like Wikipedia is for semantic knowledge. We're going to end up capturing very large parts of the world, especially in the more geographically interesting places, and there'll be a sort of collective contribution to making that happen. I thought at first when I did this thing three days after we launched and searched for Notre Dame, it was maybe just because we used Notre Dame as a demo, but if you search for Cologne Cathedral, you got the same sorts of results, or the Duomo in Florence, or the Trevi Fountain, or the Eiffel Tower. These are all different people's synths of these places, or Chichen Itza, or Tulum, or Angkor Wat, or Pisa, or whatever. So that's the end of the presentation. We should talk now.
Ooh. This is seriously cool what you're doing there. By the way, this is the first time I've heard the verb to synth something, but I guess I'm going to be hearing that a lot more, right?
Ever since Google, we're all very concerned with finding verbs to go with.
So you're going to synth it, and you heard it here as a dictionary person where the word started.
I did.
So okay.
It's like morphed. It doesn't mean what it means.
But I guess a general question I want to ask the whole panel now. We have 10 minutes, but you just saw what he can do. Is that cool or what? And can it be useful to you? And one way, a question I want to ask you in turn is, so far you've been talking about spatial three-dimensionality. Can you imagine synth becoming four-dimensional in the sense that you would be able, for example, if you had the entire, could you imagine the same technology? We're not talking visual now, but taking the entire 26 volumes of the Assyrian language and being able to show the evolution of the language over time with this kind of technology. Or similarly, once you have the DNA of all the species on Earth in some fantasy future, could you work your way back from that three-dimensionally through and reconstruct the whole history of evolution with this kind of technology or the human brain? So
well,
am I way too far up ahead?
You have to squint hard. You have to squint hard to see
well,
something.
that's what I do. I'm a squinter. You're a synther and I'm a squinter.
Well, we have certainly played with adding the fourth dimension of time to these things. One can add the fourth dimension of time and get interesting results. But the kind of stuff that I just showed, I think, really fires people's imaginations. In the end, though, it's really very simple. I mean, what we're doing is not that. How to put it? It only works for things that are more or less rigid, or things that stay still, like Jesse did when I took the photos. It only works when the actual pixels look more or less the same from different points of view. It's really a very limited sort of thing. If you talk more broadly about things like zoomable user interfaces or the ability to stream massive amounts of data over narrow bandwidth connections, so you can explore them even if you're on a cell phone in Tanzania or whatever, those technologies are certainly important to all sorts of information exploration, whether it's visual or semantic or something else. Mm-hmm. But photosynth per se is always going to be very, very limited in what it, well, no, one should never say always. For the foreseeable future, meaning the next 3 or 4 years at least, it's not going to be usable for that sort of thing.
At Microsoft, they call futurism what's happening 3 years from now, basically. But
it's been shrinking. Yeah.
Did you guys have some questions or interaction with him, or?
Well, I think the crab and the type specimen, what we in the museum world are confronted with is mailing specimens all around the world. And in the process of mailing this stuff and getting it to come back, it almost always does, but sometimes it doesn't. So as a result, with type specimens, we are very, very protective of those. Right. And what this does is a way of taking that type specimen of the crab from the MCZ and sharing it out in the world without relying on the Postal Service to send something out, which you're not going to send out anyway.
Yeah, this was just one particular application that I think was a very beautiful fit between a problem and a solution. When this kind of thing happens, it's great.
Martha,
but it's definitely not the solution to all problems.
Martha was talking about how right now you're dealing with a similar problem in terms of having to return all the you may be having to return. Yeah.
A colleague of mine at the Oriental Institute, Matthew Stolper, is in charge of a project right now to document all of the tablets from the ancient site of Persepolis that will need to go back to Iran. And he is using a very similar process whereby they're taking about 6 to 12 photographs of each tablet, and then of each cuneiform tablet, things about the size of a matchbox.
These things, they look like shredded wheat, basically.
Yeah, they look like shredded wheat. And
they would synth really well. I would love to see them on Photosynth.
Of course they would. And then they have impressed on them the cuneiform script. And by taking these different photographs, they can then create what you're doing with this ability to turn it so that the light, the shadow, hits it in different ways. And this is, of course, what we're hoping will be our way of preserving in virtual time, in virtual preservation, antiquities that we fear will be lost. I love, can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
There were so many ideas that came about here. I want to thank you so much. But I think this idea of doing this in time would be fabulous, to be able to see what Notre Dame looked like in 1912 on September 14th at 2 a.m. versus 6 p.m. I mean, to be able to see how the shadows work and how monuments such as these erode or have reconstructions done to them, repairs, so forth, would be just extraordinary if you could make that happen.
We should talk about it over dinner. We've actually tried all sorts of interesting things along these lines. Like there are not very many places in the world that are photographed densely enough, especially over time, to really see that sort of thing happen. But there are some places, like the temples around Angkor Wat.
Right.
You can see fig trees growing and being chopped down and so on as they grow up through the temple. Enough photos have been taken over a long enough time. It's really what happens from here on out that starts to get very interesting when we think about photography and video over time, because it's been just a trickle historically compared to what we have now. And if we again squint for a moment and imagine, although this is hard to imagine, that humans will survive for more than another few years, maybe if the election goes the right way, then
when we finally got it all virtually embedded, we'll be gone.
Well, then the kinds of things that might be possible over time really start to. Yeah. We really start to go crazy.
By the way, the one thing you and I were talking about on our way over here is we have this fantasy that now what you've just done with all these things will be available for all eternity, but in fact, with how computers are changing, what you just done will be available for about 2 or 3 years, and then you won't have a machine to use it because the platforms will be so much more advanced. The recent presidential administrations are virtual sinkholes in terms of documentation.
Yeah, I guess this is actually a pretty important topic in thinking about encyclopedic projects in general as well. There is that sense that when you digitize something, it's around forever. But in fact, that's so far from being the case. I mean, I've been lucky enough to work with Gutenberg Bibles and things like this that have been around, that look like they're still new, and things that I burned onto CDs and DVDs in the late '90s are no longer usable. Yeah. So the rate of mortality of digital artifacts is still it's incalculable.
You just said something great under your breath, but that. Here's an idea: put it on clay tablets, and really embed on. That'll last for a long time, longer than, by the way, paper. If you chew up trees and lay them out in paper, that doesn't last very long. But these clay tablets really last.
I like it.
But one of the things that's so extraordinary to me about all of our projects, of course, is that what we're demonstrating is that the human mind, if I can use it in a metaphoric way and not a biological way, human mind really does want very much to organize our world. We need to understand what we're looking at, and all this information that's coming at us, whether it's a couple of hundred animals seen in the desert in Iraq or billions of neurons in a brain. We have to try to classify these things, otherwise we can't work with them. It's extraordinary, the way that we're all from our different platforms, we're all thinking about how we can organize the world.
Sometimes that leads us into a lot of error, which I think is one of the things that concerns you, and that I was actually talking with Patty about this at the EOL. I think it also leads us into some error in taxonomizing life.
Of course.
We think about species, and the species idea works well for large creatures, but doesn't work so well for microorganisms that are constantly swapping their DNA around with each other, in which one droplet of water might have a different species, depending on how you define it, than another in a pond, and so on. Each crevice between your teeth has different kinds of bacteria in it.
And each one of our events has a red light that goes off, which just happened. Now, before we close, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Carla for having helped sponsor this. And by the way, Joe back there is amazing. Can you applaud Joe? The things that run in Thorn really run, and it's really great to be working here. And outside of that, I want to thank the panel very much, and I just want to say that I just wish Studs could have heard this. But anyway, thank you.